Hello and welcome to the Global Hydrogen interview series, where we slice through the buzz surrounding what many people are calling the new oil of the 21st century. My name is 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗆𝗆. I'm the director of the Energy Transition Dialogue at Gulf Intelligence, and I'm very glad to have 𝗤𝗵𝗲𝗆𝗆 with me today. 𝗤𝗵𝗲 is Head of Corporate Development and Strategy at the 𝗤𝗵𝗲 Europe, which of course we will also know as OGE. Welcome, 𝗤𝗵𝗲. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for having me here.
No, not at all. My pleasure, our pleasure. Let's dive in with some recent news that we've been hearing on the European Hydrogen Backbone, which is also known as the EHB. And this initiative was really first announced last July 2020. And when it sparked debate across Europe, and it described a network of 23,000 kilometers of hydrogen infrastructure covering 10 countries, which at the time was very ambitious in itself. Now, only in mid-April, this is nearly doubled in terms of kilometers to nearly 40,000 kilometers by 2040, connecting 21 European countries. Now, that is a huge leap in less than a year in terms of ambition. What are your thoughts on that, please?
Well, as Germany's largest TSO, OGE realized very early on that it's important to create the hydrogen infrastructure as early as possible, because all the ambitious projects make no sense if you cannot bring the hydrogen to the customer.
Indeed.
So that's why we brought together a number of TSOs, and the group got even larger, as you said, to highlight how it will be possible to create pan-European hydrogen infrastructure. We are absolutely convinced that the hydrogen market will be a pan-European market, just as the natural gas market is today, with hydrogen transport across Europe from north to south, from east to west, and the other way around. And to highlight to policymakers also what is possible, we made this exercise to show how the infrastructure could look like. There are a few key takeaways from the piece of work. The first very important takeaway is, it is possible to transport hydrogen through existing natural gas infrastructure.
I think two-thirds of existing,
is existing natural gas infrastructure, which makes it speedy and cost efficient to use it. The second very important insight is that it's actually quite cheap to transport the hydrogen across long distances. We came up with an average transport cost of approximately 15 cents per kilogram and 1,000 kilometers. And if you compare that to the overall hydrogen price, that's like nothing. So it's really cheap to transport hydrogen across long distances. And the third important insight is, it is possible to create a pan-European network rather quickly. So the kilometers that you mentioned will be there in 2040, provided that we have the right framework in place for that.
You just mentioned a few words that really caught my ear. You mentioned speedy and affordable. Now these two words, especially with green hydrogen, seem to be major sticking points in other conversations. That still, obviously, it's an embryonic market for green hydrogen, not so much in the EU, but elsewhere as well. And of course, the EU is surging ahead with initiatives like this and more detailed roadmaps than anywhere else. So speedy in itself is reassuring to hear, but also in terms of the cost of transport, which is another real sticking point, and the sense of overall immediacy with this. Do you think that with the broader conversation, especially with green hydrogen, that there's too much of a focus on the trouble spots instead of focusing on some of the more strong opportunities that have been highlighted, as you said just now, through this project?
Well, I think it's a quite balanced discussion so far as I see it, and it's important also to look at the challenges and to make green hydrogen economic in the midterm. This is really important to showcase also to policymakers what needs to be done to achieve that. And I'm actually quite positive because I see that many partners that we work with on the industry side, but also policymakers, do see the advantages of hydrogen as such, of green hydrogen, but also on using existing infrastructure.
No, of course, and within the EU, I think that positive conversation, or the opportunity, pushing through those opportunities, it's very robust. We obviously do a lot of interviews on hydrogen, and we cover, it's a global series, so we cover different countries and regions, of course, and transport keeps coming up as a major sticking point, a reason why investors still see hydrogen potentially as a high risk route for them. It's something that they just feel is perhaps surmountable towards the end of the 2020s. It's certainly not the figures you just gave. And as I already mentioned, the EU is obviously pioneering ahead and pushing the boundaries with this anyway. In terms of engaging with other countries beyond the EU, with this positive narrative, number one, because everybody understands the benefits, I believe, of hydrogen and green hydrogen and the whole package. They're very, very obvious, and they're plentiful as well. And if we can make them work, it's good for all of us. But getting the theory through to the action on the ground and getting those numbers pinned down, as you've just done on a European basis, seems to be a very critical step for some other regions to be taking. And we're obviously seeing a lot more collaboration, for example, between Germany and Saudi Arabia, with Saudi potentially being an exporter to Germany. I believe needs about 70% of its hydrogen needs to be imported, for example. So what's your take on that, and more international partnerships coming through?
Yeah. I think the hydrogen demand in Germany is already quite substantial, and it will increase rapidly. And it is clear that a vast amount of the production will not come from German sources. So it will be imported, 70, 80, perhaps up to 90% will be imported. And of course, it makes sense to look at countries that have favorable conditions for the production of either hydrogen or of synthetic natural gas, to bring that to Germany and to Europe. And the partnerships that are developing currently actually show that the Gulf region can play an important role in that picture. Not only for hydrogen, as I said, because on the transport side, there are still some challenges to ship hydrogen in ships. But also for synthetic natural gas, which could play an important role in the medium and long term in Germany and Europe as well.
What are the depths of these partnerships? So, for example, between Germany and Gulf nations, Europe and Gulf nations, if you'd like to keep it a bit broader, this is still a growing market. Green hydrogen is at the very, very, very early stages. It's not in itself a brand new market, but in terms of the applications we're talking about and the scale of growth, it's relatively new. Mm-hmm. And I imagine the relationship between the regions isn't a simple sign on the dotted line import-export conversation. I imagine it needs to go a lot deeper than that in terms of co-support with infrastructure discussions, with pricing expectations. There's a lot, I imagine there's a lot more involved in getting such a deal and a partnership set up because of the nature of this market. Is that correct to think?
Yeah, what we realize as a company is when you want to develop a new market segment, it's important to bring together all elements of the value chain. So to really align the sources, the transport bit, and the sinks, the customers. And only if all these three come together, then you can develop a new value chain and a new market. When it comes to sources which come from abroad, as you rightly said, it's important to have a partnership that goes beyond pure contractual relationships. So support from the government side is important to have aligned views on mid and long-term demand. Also to give investors a basis for their long-term, quite significant investments. But also it's important to understand how the market will actually work in the customer's country in terms of framework, incentives, and price expectations. And as hydrogen, as beautiful as it is more expensive than all the other fossil fuels, natural gas. It is important that there's political support for hydrogen also on the customer side. And of course, for the long-term pricing, it is important to understand what policymakers do. I strongly believe that stable and robust measures on the demand side to create the demand side pull are important. For example, a target for hydrogen in 2030 and 2040, a mandatory target for that. And this would allow suppliers also to have more robust forecasts on expected prices for hydrogen.
And for investors to feel more comfortable as well, for especially those who are newer to the low carbon market, which, let's be honest, is quite a big majority coming into the lower carbon growth world, and to make them feel more comfortable in this new market as well. And of course, the Middle East can learn quite a lot from what Europe's doing. The pan-regional plans for gas pipelines and trade have still, and power as well, have still not quite taken off as planned. And there is, of course, very established and extensive infrastructure in the region, thanks to the fossil fuel market here. That means the plans that are being detailed, with the 40,000 kilometers and 2/3 of existing natural gas pipelines being that sort of idea and that sort of roadmap, certainly being a good template for perhaps the Middle East to leverage as well. And in terms, you just touched on, sorry?
Absolutely, yep.
You just touched on pricing as well. And in February, another bit of recent news is that after 2 years of research and prep, which in itself was ahead of the game, around 30 European energy companies and players officially launched the HyDeal ambition. Of course, we've heard quite a lot about this, with the aim of delivering 100% green hydrogen across Europe, using some of that infrastructure we've been touching on, at 1.5 euros a kilo before 2030. So that's quite a near-term target, really. What are your views on that? I mean, I assume you're pro it and you think that it can really take off, but what's needed to get it off the ground and to be able to hit that target?
Yeah, so OGE is actually one of the partners of the HyDeal consortium. As we see that there's a lot of potential for green hydrogen in Southern Europe, and we want to do our bit to support that development. There's a very ambitious target, as you said, to develop hydrogen production in Southern Europe, and the conditions are quite good for that. One key factor, of course, is the electricity price, which has a key impact on the production cost of hydrogen. The second important factor is the electrolyzers cost, to bring them down. And I think projects like HyDeal actually support that, because of the sheer size of electrolyzers that you need. It could go down the cost curve for electrolyzers. And the third important bit, of course, is the infrastructure, because you need to bring the hydrogen and the gas to customers across Europe. So all these things need to come together.
Hence EHV. Exactly. Sabine, thank you very much for joining us. I think we covered quite a bit in a short amount of time, and we do hope you'll be able to join us again soon. If we're seeing such ambition as we've seen with EHB in less than a year, like I say, a near doubling in terms of the kilometres, and certainly a doubling in terms of the countries involved, then I'm very keen to see what we could see in the next 9 to 12 months as well. So we hope you can join us again.
Thank you, Michelle. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.